Jon Jones has officially retired from the UFC after 17 years in the company, being one of the most recognisable names in the sport and one of the greatest of all time. Jones has an incredibly extensive resume. He's been fighting at championship level since 2011, so today we're going to go through his resume and determine how good it actually is. The criteria, as I've explained before in previous similar videos, each opponent he's fought in the UFC will be ranked from S tier to D tier, considering several factors including their losses, their wins, were they champions at the time, circumstances surrounding the fight. Anyway, like the video because his first opponent in his debut was Andre Guzmão. Jones was 21 years old at the time of the fight. Guzmão is only really known for his loss to Jones. He went 0-2 in the UFC before leaving and then retiring the next year, being knocked out in the first round in the fight after Jones. Guzmão was actually quite an experienced jiu-jitsu practitioner and was 6-0 going into the fight, but there's really nothing to go off of on Guzmão's UFC record. So for that reason, Guzmão is going to go at the bottom in D tier. Then for his second UFC fight, he takes on Stephan Bonnar. Bonnar is obviously best known for his war versus Forrest Griffin. He actually had two and he lost both of them. There aren't really any wins that stand out on Bonnar's record. He would typically lose every time he steps up to a certain level, so he's going to go in the C tier. Jones then took on Jake O'Brien. Similar situation to Stephan Bonnar, nothing really worth mentioning in terms of achievements. He was cut from the UFC after losing to Jones. Jake O'Brien goes in the C tier. Then Jones took his first official loss at the hands of Matt Hamill. Regardless of how the fight played out, I can't count it as a win, but if it was to be a win, he'd be in the B tier. Then Jones comes back and beats Brandon Vera. Vera was coming off a very close decision loss to Randy Couture, knocking Couture down in round 2. Vera was a bit on and off. He knocked out Frank Mir within a minute back in 2006. Close fight versus Tim Sylvia, close fight versus Randy Couture. I think Vera's good enough to be our first in the B tier. Then Jones takes on Vladimir Matyushenko. Matyushenko was a proper UFC veteran by this point, 39 years old, joined the UFC in 2001. After losing to Jones, he'd actually knock out his next two opponents in the first round. But granted, despite 10 years in the UFC, no one he beat was really worth mentioning. So Matyushenko goes in the C tier. Then Jones takes on Ryan Bader. Bader is the first of his opponents who actually has a notable history after losing to Jones. Prior to the Jones fight, he was on a 5-fight winning streak, including Keith Jardine and Rogerio Nogueira. Went on to beat Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, Phil Davis over in St. Preux. Not to mention became Bellator heavyweight champion after leaving the UFC. Despite all that though, Bader was never really that close to being a UFC champion. And when he did lose to a certain level of opposition, he'd typically be way out of his depth and get finished in the first or second round. So I'm going to put Ryan Bader in the B+ tier. Then Jones takes on Mauricio Shogun Rua. Shogun was the defending champion at the time, and this fight made Jones the champion for the first time in his career. Now normally on principle you should put the defending champion at A+, but that only really applies if I think the fighter really represents an A+ level fighter. Shogun was 3-2 in the UFC at the time. Lost his debut to Forrest Griffin by submission, knocked out Mark Coleman and Chuck Liddell, then lost a really close decision to Lyoto Machida for the title, followed by winning the title by first round knockout versus Machida. Shogun is the first of a trifecta of names at light heavyweight that seem to have beaten each other. Forrest Griffin, Rampage, Shogun, Machida all seem to have wins over each other. Shogun is close to being A+, but he's not the same guy I think that was stomping on people's heads in Pride, so I'm only going to put Shogun in the A tier. Then Jones takes on Rampage Jackson. Rampage was the champion back in 2007, knocked out Chuck Liddell, then beat Dan Henderson, and then lost his belt to Forrest Griffin by decision. He does technically have a win over Lyoto Machida, but if you've seen that fight you know that wasn't a win. Technically he was 1-2 in his last 3 before fighting for the title, but then again he is a former champion, he did beat Chuck Liddell and Dan Henderson, he goes in the B+ tier. Then Jones sleeps Lyoto Machida. Up to the Shogun Rua loss, Machida was on a ridiculous streak, beating the likes of Stephan Bonnar, Rich Franklin, BJ Penn, Tito Ortiz, Rashad Evans for the title, and then Shogun Rua. He was coming off the knockout win over Randy Couture before the Jones fight. I think Machida is on a similar level to Shogun, I'm going to put him in the A tier as well. Then Jones took on Rashad Evans. Outside of the single one-sided Machida loss, Rashad had knocked out Chuck Liddell, knocked out Forrest Griffin, beat Rampage Jackson, beat Phil Davis, beat Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, Michael Bisping, Tito Ortiz. He does have quite an underrated record. And for that reason Rashad is also going to go in the A tier. Then Jones takes on Vitor Belfort. Keep in mind this was peak TRT Vitor. Before and after the Jones fight, you have a first round submission over Rumble Johnson, 3 first round knockouts over Michael Bisping, Luke Rockhold and Dan Henderson. Vitor was ridiculous at this point, and Jones beat him. I think he goes in the A tier. Then Jones takes on Chael Sonnen. This was a bit of a mismatch considering Chael's last fight was a loss by knockout to Anderson Silva at 185. Chael had never actually fought at light heavyweight in the UFC. Chael himself said he knew he was going to lose going into the fight. But overall, Chael was decent enough, he goes in the B tier. Then Jones has his first ever real difficult fight in Alexander Gustiffson. Gustiffson was on a great winning streak going into the fight. Hamill, Matyushenko and Shogun. Not to mention Gustiffson's height and reach, which made him difficult for everyone. And especially because of how hard of a fight he gave to Jones and then DC later on. I'm going to put him in the A+ champion tier, despite him actually never winning a title. Then Jones takes on Glover Teixeira. Again, this is a really good win on Jones's record. Prior to the fight, he just beat Rampage Jackson and knocks out Ryan Bader in the first round. Not to mention him becoming champion 6 years later versus Jan Blachowicz. He's had great wins across his entire career: Rashad Evans, Jared Cannonier, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, Nikita Krylov. I'm going to put Glover again in the A+ tier. Then Jones takes on his most notable opponent, Daniel Cormier. DC was undefeated going into the fight with Jones, had wins over Bigfoot Silva, Frank Mir, Josh Barnett, Dan Henderson, picked up some all-time great wins after losing to Jones, beat Anthony Rumble Johnson for the vacant title after Jones got stripped, beat Alexander Gustiffson, moved up to heavyweight and knocked out Stipe Mioic in the first round. DC is one of 8 two-division champions in UFC history. He's quite literally one of the greatest of all time, and that earns him the rare distinction of S-tier win. Jones then comes back and beats Ovin St. Preux. This fight was for the interim title after Jones got stripped. I don't think OSP even deserved an interim title shot. He was on a one-fight win streak beating Rafael Cavalcante. Ovin St. Preux goes in the B tier. Jones then rematches Daniel Cormier. This fight was overturned to a no contest after a positive PED test. I think it says a lot that the best performance of Jones's career also happens to be the one fight where he tested positive for steroids. The fact that he looked so good in this fight and then tested positive is not a coincidence. I'm not going to count this as a win. Then Jones rematches Alexander Gustiffson. This is a weird one because the way that Gustiffson turned up for the fight, you'd think he wasn't the same A+ level fighter he fought the first time. But his last fight was a spectacular performance over Glover Teixeira. There's no real reason to suggest Gustiffson was out of his prime in this fight. He just got beat even worse, and because it's the same guy, I'm going to say he's an A+ level win again. Then Jones takes on Anthony Smith. This is likely the worst title defence of Jones's career. He was on a decent winning streak beating Shogun Hua and Rashad Evans, but those are two very, very old versions of those two fighters. He got a very legitimate win over Volkan Oezdemir to get the title shot, but it is hard to look at some of Smith's performances afterwards, mainly the ones where he curls up into a ball, and give Jones loads of credit for that win. So he's going to go in the B tier. Then Jones takes on Thiago Santos. This is very similar to Vitor Belfort in some ways. This was a time period where Thiago Santos was an absolute machine. Knocked out Jack Hermansson, knocked out Anthony Smith, knocked out Jimmy Manoa, knocked out Jan Blachowicz. Santos was on a tear when he still had both knees, and Jones was the one to ruin his ligaments. Even though Santos went on the slide afterwards, the form he was on before the fight and during the fight, I think makes Santos an A-tier win. Then Jones takes on Dominic Reyes. I think Reyes beat Jones quite clearly. I will normally count it anyway if it's a close decision, like Hendricks versus GSP. But this was so clear of a win for Reyes, I'm not going to count this as a win. If it was a win, he'd be in the A tier. Then Jones sits out for 2 years waiting for Ngannou to leave, then submits Ciryl Gane in 2 minutes. I know a lot of people discredit this win by saying that Gane wasn't well rounded. But realistically, with the exception of Aspinall and Curtis Blades, the whole division isn't well rounded, and Ciryl Gane was the clear number 1 after Ngannou left. Gane was never spectacular, but not terrible either. He's going to go in the A tier. Then Jones takes on Stipe Mioic. There is a massive asterisk in this fight. Normally Stipe Mioic on a guy's record would be S tier or A+ at least. But Stipe Mioic had not won a fight in 4 years. His last fight was a knockout loss to Francis Ngannou. He wasn't even training MMA full-time consistently, he was a firefighter. All that bumped Stipe from being an S tier, A+ tier win to a B+ tier win. Now to overview the criteria in written form, there's 1 S tier win, DC in the first fight. 3 A+ tier wins, Gustiffson in the first and second fight in Glover Teixeira. Several A tier wins, Shogun, Machida, Evans, Vitor, Thiago Santos and Ciryl Gane. Several B+ wins, Ryan Bader, Rampage, Stipe. B tier, Brandon Vera, Chael Sonnen, OSP and Anthony Smith. C tier, Stephan Bonner, Jake O'Brien, Matyushenko. And 1 D tier win, Andrei Guzmão. In terms of fights that I haven't counted, Matt Hamill would have been a B tier win, DC in the rematch would have been an S tier, and Dominic Reyes would be A tier. In terms of achievements, 14 title wins, 11 title defences, and a champion in 2 weight classes. To compare this to other resumes, I've only made one resume video for the UFC, and that's GSP. I'm not going to spoil it in case you want to check it out, but by the numbers, Jones has more achievements than GSP. But GSP has 2 S tier wins, also 3 A+ tier wins, same amount of A tier wins. GSP does have 2 emphatic finish losses on his record, but there are also asterisks on John's record, like his cheating, steroids, his time off, blatantly avoiding Aspinall and Ngannou. It's difficult to compare the two, it comes down to preference, but it is between him and GSP for the best resume of all time. And that's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.